So there was one component of Path of Fire that's actually been disabled for a long while. I'm guessing it's because of the interesting tech they're using alongside it. But that Part of Fire is actually very lore-heavy, and I wanted to share it with you all for a while. It's the lost lore of the desert. So one thing I've always really wanted from this game is, as a part of map completion, the ability to find items around maps, like points of interest, for example, that once you collect them, give you lore books and pages of lore books and extra information about the areas that you're traveling around. I've always loved that idea. Well, in this expansion, they did something very similar to that. In fact, about as close as I believe we're ever going to get to it. And it does not appear as a formal aspect of map completion. I suppose that's not the truly exciting part anyway. But you can find pages of various bits of lore in each of the 5 new maps. And we saw them playing with that a lot last year. And in the previous Living World season, where we could get lore in maps like Lake Doric, and we could get lore in like the Ring of Fire Island chain. They kept twisting the formula. It was a bit frustrating in some of their old formats, because you'd get the lore like one random page out of order immediately when pressing F, and the only way you could put it all into a meaningful perspective was at the very end. Things like that were a bit frustrating, but the format they've gone with for the expansion is really top. So the idea is you just run around these maps, finding lost pages. I found the majority of them on my original exploration, just doing the story and my first acquisition of the mounts and so forth. But they're usually quite hidden. Once you get all of them, that's when they give you the lore. Once you finish the achievement, the collection, you get an item in your inventory. And so if you check out here, I've got 5 of them. I've just gone through and finished grabbing them all for today. Some of them were a bit harder than others. As you go deeper into the expansion, they're harder to get. But these are the ultimate rewards from this side of the game. 5 books. Each with a different title. One is the Garden of the Gods, so this is associated with the first map, and then the Book of Vlast, and so on and so on. I want to give you guys the content of these, and I think it will be really fun. So, one thing that's even better as well that the devs did here is when you read the books, you can either flip to individual pages, so we can start at page 1, and we can read, but you'll also notice that it gives us some dialogue in the background. This is actually voice acted. And they use kind of the timey feature here, so the voices emanating from behind us. They don't really get into specifics as to where this comes from. But now you don't even have to read it as a wall of text. The devs have given it to you in full voice-acted format. And so we're going to talk a little bit about getting these books and what their content is. So starting with the Garden of the Gods. It's pretty simple. This one, I think I missed a single sandy page in a really basic area up at Amnoon or something early on. So we can just jump straight in on the content of this. This is written by a fanatical follower of Cormyr, and the name, the Garden of the Gods, sounds very exciting, doesn't it? We're going to find that that's actually referring to the idea of Tyria itself. So let's listen to the complete story, shall we?
After long hours of prayer, the goddess of truth herself has at last revealed the answers I sought. Praise Cormyr. In her name, I will share the reasons behind our gods' withdrawal from this world. And make no mistake, the gods have withdrawn. Prayers go unanswered. Ascension fails. But do not despair or rage. Our gods still love us, and it is that love that drove them to leave. When the gods first brought humanity to this world, they were planting a garden. We were the seeds, with Tyria the fertile soil in which we would thrive. Like all gardens, it would experience and demonstrate life, death, challenge, order, growth, and beauty as it matured from carefully arranged rows of potential into dynamic, evolving reality. But there was a blight below the soil the gardeners could not prepare for. A predatory threat that would consume both the garden and the nutrients that sustained it. The Elder Dragons. When the dragons rose, the gods realized a terrible truth. Any effort to save the garden would instead destroy it. Or them. If humanity were to endure under their guidance, it could not be here. Reluctantly, the gods withdrew. They had to find new soil to tend, that their faithful might someday see the full, resplendent bloom of this most glorious garden. Praise Cormyr!
So, there's a lot going on in this that I really want to dig into. Now, the first reason I really enjoy this is we get to hear this kind of why the gods came to Tyria story. Now, this is sort of a repackaged version of something we already knew as lore enthusiasts, but most of the times where we've sort of had this impression of the gods and why they came to Tyria and how this worked, that early lore about Melanju coming and bringing life and so on, all of these ideas have never really been out there and in the open in the same way as it now is because of Path of Fire. And I think that even though this is sort of treading ground we already knew, it's very, as much of Path of Fire is very useful for the fact of bringing most of the community up to understanding, right? So there's something really amazing that this kind of goes into a little bit here, though. Some people have criticized the Path of Fire story for keeping the gods away and so on. I would argue that that's kind of the status quo of Guild Wars 2, and we've been okay with that being the status quo for a while. But listen to this line again. When the dragons rose, the gods realized a terrible truth. Any effort to save the garden would instead destroy it or them. If humanity were to endure under their guidance, it could not be here. So there's a lot in that. Basically, that one line is the main thing I want to focus on with this particular book before we move on. So first, we kind of hear something that hadn't been outright stated as far as I remember until now, and that's that the gods did not know about the dragons before they got there, and their learning about the dragons was kind of something they just had to wrestle with once they were already on Tyria. And of course, we've heard about them like taking dragon-related artifacts and things and putting them in the vaults beneath Ra, and we knew that they had some understanding of the dragons, but just to how deep that understanding was, we never really knew. You'll recall, up until very recently, there were many theories, people saying that the gods are the dragons and that they're just two sides. And I suppose in terms of realms of magic and so on, those discussions are still valid, but you know, just lines like this really teach us a lot without us even realizing, really. But that eliminates a lot of possibilities. So that's quite interesting. But here's the really killer line: if humanity were to endure under their guidance, it could not be here. So what does that mean? The text is obviously supposed to be this guy fanatical about Cormyr and the gods, and so I think that they're doing a bit of an unreliable narrator style thing here, where the suggestion is, can we really take this for truth? He's stating that the gods love humanity. It's all about humanity, right? He's suggesting that they came to Tyria just to make a place for humanity to flourish. Who cares about the other races? The gods came here for humanity to flourish, and now that they've realized that hasn't happened, they're going somewhere else to have humanity endure elsewhere, endure under their guidance. And so it's this really interesting perspective where maybe we can say this guy's wrong and the gods care a lot more about just humanity, but obviously he's self-interested. Or we can say, yeah, you know, the gods, for whatever reason, for some reason, really care about this human race. And that leads to all kinds of interesting questions. Why? What is the true origins of humanity before they were on Tyria, before the gods interfered and put us in this garden that is doomed? Why do they have this like allegiance? And I love the idea of going down that it's not just that this guy's fanatical, but there's some deeper thing going on, like you know, it suggests at some story that the gods somehow feel like they owe it to humanity. Maybe the gods were responsible for humanity's initial homeworld's destruction, or realm in the mist, or whatever destruction. And so now they're desperately trying to make up for some atrocious crime they once committed. So they brought them to Tyria. Tyria hasn't worked out, so they're going to do something else. So I love all these ideas. And to an extent, I love the idea that this guy's just jaded and he just cares about humans. And he thinks the gods are all about that. But then, of course, there's this other thing here as well, which I really think should have been expressed more directly in Path of Fire. I mean, this is a pretty good way of expressing it, but I think in the main story it deserved to be there. Where have the gods gone? There is a definite suggestion here. If humanity to endure under their guidance, it could not be here. That's suggesting, you know, just top level, that the gods are no longer on Tyria, and the gods are no longer in their realms in the mists. Because they are living somewhere else. They're on another world. They're making another garden. The title of this book, The Garden of the Gods, it could be referring to Tyria, or, you know, there's this idea that they're making another garden where humanity can endure under their guidance. And that's where they are now. You know, we hear about the gods having once upon a time lived in Ra, right? I think the idea is, or according to this priest at least, that they're in some other Ara, in some other world now, and that they're not in. That's where they've gone to. And I love this idea that it's all motivated around the humans, and it's a very interesting perspective. So it's funny that so much of the quality of this for me comes from just that one like little line there towards the end. But man, what a great book. He also says, by the way, at the start that it's after hours of prayer that Cormier reveals these truths to him. I'm not quite sure how that works, and obviously Cormier never talks about that very much. There you go, so that's the Garden of the Gods. That's what we get associated with the first map. Let's move on. We now have the Book of Vlast. So this is acquired from finding all the lost pages in the second map, the Desert Highlands. This is also the map, of course, where we have all the Vlast crystals that we're looking around at. It's a perfect moment in the story to learn about Vlast. I wonder if the devs were hoping that completionist players would get these books in the middle of their initial playthrough. That would be quite exciting, right? Because it would mean you'd learn about this Garden of the Gods thing right before meeting Cormier at the end of the second map, and you'd be learning about Vlast while learning about Vlast in the second map. So the actual acquisition of the pages in this one, again, weren't too tricky. In fact, I don't really recall any specific one of any of them that was a particular nuisance to get. I know I'd missed a few, but nothing really that major. So let's just jump straight on into the book, shall we, as we're out near the southern edge of the Garden of Saborin here. Let's listen to the Book of Vlast.
In the ancient days, Glint served a titanic master, the elder dragon, Kralkatorrik. Mindless and brutal, Glint decimated continents at the elder dragon's command. It was then that we, the Forgotten, developed a ritual to free a creature from the Elder Dragon's control. We performed it on Glint with great success. Her mind cleared, and Glint's will was her own. Yes, after Glint was freed from Kralkatorrik's madness, she gave birth to her eggs. First among these was a dragonling named Vlast. When the branded came, he was the first to throw himself into the fray. His battles were legendary. Many times we were saved by a shadow swooping in from the sky. The people of Alona told tales for generations, both of hope and of fear toward their protector. When the branded came, Glint sent Vlast away. She could feel Kralkatorrik coming to destroy her. She prophesied a great legacy, an important role for Vlast, and could not risk his death as well. After the death of his mother, Vlast battled the branded, destroying them in a vengeful swath. More poured into Alona from the north, threatening to destroy the country and all who live there. Now, as we all fall under Kralkatorrik's gaze, Vlast fights on. He has beaten many of Kralkatorrik's followers, but there is only so much that one creature, even if it happens to be a dragon, can do.
All right, there's a lot of reasons to love this one too. So again, we're touching up on the same story about Vlast. I do love how much they put in of Vlast on this expansion, because he almost felt like an extra part of the lore that wasn't going to be dived into too much. It gives me a lot of hope actually for Shiny in the hidden city of Adashim too for season 4 and beyond. But there's a lot of fun things. First, this is Joso Escher. I believe Joso Escher is also the same branded Forgotten that we fight at the Augury Rock meta event, or maybe I'm thinking of a different character. But you'll notice this is a voice-acted Forgotten. And what really blows my mind about this is I believe this is like the one voice-acted Forgotten we've ever had in 12 years of Guild Wars. I don't believe any of the Forgotten in Guild Wars 1 that we interacted with ever had any voice acting. And not even in the main story of Path of Fire did we do that. So they just hired someone and had to work out like a voice direction and stuff for a, well, I'm not saying that the voice actor for this character would have been different, but they had to figure out a direction for what they wanted this voice to be. And he does the S thing a little bit. You know, a lot of the Forgotten names, right? They all had these lots of sibilants in them and lots of S's. I wish he'd exaggerated a bit more, but, you know, I almost regret that the one place we get a bit of Forgotten voice acting is here in this capacity, because it means that they wouldn't have spent as much time refining it as they otherwise potentially could have. But yeah, so we hear from this Forgotten. And I think actually a lot of this is quite front-loaded. A lot what we hear about Vlast here, we kind of also get in the main story. We get when we're at Kesha, we get through the vision crystals of Vlast himself. But what I really like to look back at is when they're talking about Glint. So like, Glint served a titanic master, mindless and brutal. She decimated continents. Decimated continents? I mean, geez, the scales that they're taking it to here is very exciting. It gives you this idea of the very turbulent mythic past where the Elder Dragons truly were able to reign free, unchecked, you know, all those years ago during their last rising. I also love that we actually get a bit of forgotten perspective about their decision to cleanse her, because in Guild Wars 1, though we see that they're in allegiance with Glint, no one formally talks about this because the lore hadn't been written yet. In 2012, when we hear about the Altar of Vlast and we find out that this ritual happened and that this was a great contribution to the war effort once upon a time that the Forgotten had made, this cleansing of Glint, by the time we hear about that in 2012, it's just in a rah, really. And that lore, especially, the devs have always struggled sort of dealing with, I think, within the broader perspective. Heart of Thorns had all these kind of undertones of the Sylvari turning against us and becoming corrupt. Heart of Thorns needed, really, in my opinion, to talk about the Altar of Gloss, and it didn't. We also had, even episode 6 very recently, One Path Ends, it needed to talk about the Altar of Gloss with all the Sylvari looking at the Risen there and cleansing them, because we've shown that you can cleanse that corruption. It's almost like this terrible thing maybe I wonder if they regret having written in, but here they are facing it in Path of Fire at least, and here they are talking about it, and not just talking about it, but we're getting the forgotten side of the story too, that they'd freed her. I wish it had gone just a little bit further, actually. I actually think as soon as this story starts dealing with Vlast, it gets a little bit less interesting because it's stuff that we already knew. But yeah, so sorry about the friggin' lions attacking me. If that caused you guys to lose a little bit of focus, believe me, I'm with you. I lost a little bit of focus there too. Over aggro syndrome like mad, man. I'm just trying to find a pretty place and some nice moving backgrounds for you. Now we're next to a champion, forgotten Christ. Okay, so let's talk about the third book. The third book, of course, we're in the Ellen Riverlands now. This is the Legacy. And some of these were actually getting a little bit more challenging now. I remember specifically missing some quite high up. There was one behind a cave and a waterfall that I needed to find also. Obviously, all the information is on Wiki at this point. If you guys are looking for these, this is not really a video guide on the achievement itself. I'm more interested in the lore. You guys know me. So yeah, let's not faff about with it. Let's just listen to the Legacy, and I promise I'll try not to trigger any combat music. In fact, let's go to By Unknown.
Freed from the control of Kralkatorrik, Glint was a prophetess and a powerful ally. She saved many from the Elder Dragon's notice, hoping that the world could continue after they were at rest. After the threat of the Elder Dragons faded, Glint wrote the Flame Seeker Prophecies. These were a series of predictions from the time of the coming of humans until the next rise of the Elder Dragons. While the world spun on, Glint prepared herself for the Elder Dragon's return. She created her legacy, a plan to return the world to balance. Glint said that her children would play a great role. In order to facilitate Glint's legacy, the Forgotten created the city of Kesho. There, the Forgotten and Glint studied Ascension for secrets that may help them fight the Elder Dragons. In time, Kralkatorrik awakened. From its first movement, it raged against Glint and flew directly toward her lair. With the help of 6 heroes, she faced Kralkatorrik in battle and died. After Glint's death, the Forgotten tended the legacy in the city of Kesho. Kralkatorrik said it's branded upon Ilona. We all fell or were tainted, and eventually the city was lost to the desert sands. Yet, Glint's legacy continues. Does it still hold promise, despite her loss and the extinction of the Forgotten? The answer may yet exist, buried deep within Kesho.
So yeah, I mean, this is definitely the experience I would recommend to new players to try and get these. Like, this is clearly going to be a really good thing to hear right before you go to Kesho itself. So it's written by Unknown. They never said Joso this time, but it seems like this is a Forgotten again. But the voice acting doesn't suggest it's a Forgotten. The voice acting doesn't necessarily... I mean, could we say that this is an Exalted? Because we know exalted production was a thing, and these were humans, right? So this could be some human woman. I wonder why they left that as unknown. Let's listen to that line again. After Glint's death, the Forgotten tended the legacy in the seat of Kesho. Kralkatorrik set its back branded upon Alona, and we all fell or were tainted, and eventually the city was lost to the desert sands. So there's definitely a suggestion there, right? That this is someone who was at least a citizen in that area of the world. We also hear something that's totally new to me. Now, I'm not going to go on the record and say, oh, this is wrong. They should never have touched on this. They're breaking their old law. This is a retcon. But they also explain that the Flameseeker prophecies are about a lot more than just the fall of the Masat and the seeking of the flame, the Titans, right? So listen to this. She wrote the Flameseeker prophecies, and these were a series of predictions from the time of the coming of humans until the next rise of the Elder Dragons. And so that's huge. That's like everything. That's like the Flameseeker prophecies are all lore, almost, right? Like the coming of humans. Don't forget, when we talk about her being cleansed, right? This is way before the gods got here. Way before humanity was here. So the Flameseeker prophecies are about the coming of humans and all the way to the next rise of the Elder Dragons till now. Like, that's suddenly a huge prophecy. That's very different to our perspective on it in the first game. And I don't think, I am a little cynical here, I don't think it would be hard to go back to prophecies, Guild Wars 1, and see people referencing the Flameseeker prophecies, and this not quite adding up. This seems really crazy to me. But yeah, so apparently it's that, and that does change a couple of things. Maybe that makes episode 6... and Livia's line, oh, are you ready to fulfill a prophecy? Maybe we can now pin that more squarely on the Flameseeker prophecies, and retroactively that's improved that patch a little. I suppose that's for you guys to determine. But yeah, this idea of Glint's legacy. One other thing that strikes me as I listen to this book quite profoundly is, you know, when Heart of Thorns came out, there was a lot from the writers and from like the lore articles and stuff where they were like, yeah, we're learning about Glint's legacy, that we're introducing you to Glint's legacy, and this is going to be a big thing for Guild Wars 2, Glint's legacy. And, you know, here in Path of Fire, they're paying off on that. That's true. Glint's legacy has been a big driver of this story. And whether it will continue to in the coming seasons, I guess we'll see. Maybe I feel like it could have peaked actually now that we've seen Kesho and we've seen Vlast, and Vlast is dead. I think maybe it might have peaked, but we'll see. So let's move on. We got the Order of Whispers mission dispatches. This is the Desolation. Desolation is a huge goddamn map, and finding these goddamn things is not easy. I did so much zigzagging and yo-yoing around in order to acquire them all. Some of them are in really tricky places around the sulfur. But of course, the name here, we're talking about the Order of Whispers, not the Order of Shadows. The Order of Whispers, and it's the Order of Shadows we mostly see in this expansion. All right, so mission dispatches. Order of Whispers mission dispatches from Lightbringer Agbade, code name Minor Agbade. I don't know if that's an NPC we meet somewhere. If I'd done a bit more prep for this video, I could have wikied this early, but yeah, so let's listen to this story.
I've been sent to learn about the Order of Shadows, how they strayed so far, why they ignore our requests for collaboration. First step is information, and for that I need local contacts. So far, every line of inquiry we've pursued has failed. Balthazar's invasion and Joko's absence makes this a unique opportunity for discovery. I will not let the Perceptors down. Successfully infiltrated the mines. Strong Shadows influence here. Nobody's talking though. It'll take time to build enough trust to exploit. Even with my Vabian ancestry, this is dicey, dangerous. Progress. After some strong hints, I was sympathetic to the cause, and some stronger Alonian wine. A mind foreman lets slip he works with Shadows. An associate, not an agent. I can use that, and him. Met with 2 confirmed Shadows associates. Astonishing. To them, we are the ones who lost our way. To them, Joko is a more pressing threat than Kralkatorrik, or any Elder Dragon. Bombshell. Shadows is a splinter group. Original Whispers still here, further south than Alona proper. They rejected Shadow's exclusive focus on Joko. Schism formed. Shadows began parallel operations. Secured proof that Shadows plays all sides off each other to keep the status quo churning and exploiting. They advanced Joko's cause one day, Sunspear's the next. A very dangerous game. Troubling. Confirmed that Shadows sacrifices innocents simply to protect their ability to influence events. Schemes that only serve to perpetuate more schemes. Do they even have an endgame? I think they're on to me. Both of my primary contacts have gone missing, and my secondaries refuse to acknowledge me. There's so much more to learn, but I fear it's no longer safe to learn it. My cover's definitely blown. Strangers tried to follow me home. I gave them the slip, but this will be my last dispatch. If Shadows knows what I'm up to and where to find me...
the voice acting at the end there with the... So what, is he dead, guys? Has he been strangled out right there at the end? That's quite that's quite an intense thing. I actually love this one because this gives us more sort of understanding of Shadows than most of the main story. Most of the time, the story itself is preoccupied with, like, not letting us in on the know and sort of suggesting that there's more. And even right at the epilogue of this story, if you'll recall, we hear that we're probably going to find out more about Shadows. Obviously, the big takeaway from this is that original Whispers are still there, but they are further south in Alona proper. Now, when he says that, we get this book like in the Desolation, and we know that the Shadows have a base in the Desolation. So when he says that, is he talking about Vabi, or is he talking about even further south, Corner? Is he talking about Istan? So I love the idea. Is that then, maybe I'm misinterpreting this, and you guys can step in the comments and set me straight if I am. But isn't that then to kind of suggest there's like 3 factions? Because we've got the Order of Whispers with their Chantry, the Chantry of Secrets. Then we have the Order of Shadows, a splinter group from the original Order of Whispers, like the grandfather Order of Whispers, which is further south, you know, with the Vabian Chantry of Secrets. I've just realized, I don't even know, can we go to the Chantry of Secrets in this expansion? We can't, right? It's slightly further to the south. So that's like 3 different branches almost, right? Even though 2 of them would both still call themselves the Order of Whispers. Also, there's this idea, they seem very nefarious, don't they? It really feels like, you know, they're just trying to sow as much chaos as possible. I get a much bigger sense of that from this lore here than I actually did the story itself. Now, I know that there's some events, and especially in the Desolation, there's a lot of really interesting events to do with the Awakened. But here we really get to hear a bit more of that. And I wonder what ArenaNet's plans are for Shadows, because let's take it to the meta level again for a second. Why write this extra faction in? Just to make the setting a little bit richer? Just to keep the player base on their toes and try to realistically think about how this might have happened, how they might have splintered? Because I can definitely understand, you know, that if the Elder Dragons aren't directly threatening you, but Joko is, prioritizing him, I can definitely understand them, and then people flocking to that cause instead. But beyond that, is this more than just, oh, it makes sense that a splinter faction would form? Does ArenaNet have some big grand plan for them? I'm very, very curious. So yeah, that's a good one. Very intense, bit cheesy at the end, perhaps. And then lastly, here we get an intelligence report on Palawa Joko 1. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there'll be more intelligent reports in the expansion / in Living World episodes coming up. I think this is referring to, he is King Palawa Joko the First. Okay, so let's open this up. And this is an intelligence report. So is this going to be from Shadows instead of Whispers this time? Listen to the complete story.
Since his conquest of 1175 AE, the Lich King, Palawa Joko, has instituted a necroarchy, a regime run by his awakened dead. In life, King Joko provides for his subjects, with the understanding that they'll be awakened from death to serve him. Alonians look on this as an honor and a duty to their nation. They're defended by an army of their awakened ancestors. After driving King Joko's enemies, the Sun Spheres, to near extinction, his Morden Crescent turned to policing the kingdom. Though loyal subjects are granted some measure of freedom, King Joko acts swiftly to remove any disruptive influences. Exiles work the farms outside the kingdom's protective bone wall, and still must surrender their corpses to awakening. This arrangement has offered Alonians generations of protection from the many natural and magical dangers of the region. Though our order actively works to degrade Palawa Joko's rule, we also recognize him as a regional stabilizing force. There have been no recent sightings of King Joko on the continent since his unexplained crossing into the underworld. King Joko is a singularly powerful necromancer, but his long absence fuels hope that he's lost in the realm of death. Some in our order forecast the imminent collapse of Palawa Joko's regime, while others discourage such optimism.
One of the things I loved about this expansion is all this stuff to do with this necroarchy. What a great term, right? And that we have not only Palawa himself and his motivations and so on to go into, but also this really interesting dynamic of people actually worshipping, people liking the idea of becoming awakened. You know, you really get this awesome sense that it would actually be pretty alright to be in Palawa Joko's kingdom. It wouldn't be too bad. You're going to spend more time in undeath than in life. So you sort of put up with it. It's a bit like being a child versus being an adult. You put up with it for a little while, and then eventually you get to the sweet good at the end. And it seems like anyone that agrees with him, at least, and people who toe the line, they live pretty sweet lives. It's just when you try to express your freedom of thought, of movement as well, I suppose, in some respects. As soon as that happens, as soon as you cross him, that's when he comes down on you like a ton of brick. But if you bow down, you can have a pretty sweet life. And I like that. I like, you know, psychologically what's going on there, and it's a really interesting depiction. And then you get this whole other facet, and it's like, how did everyone react with Palawa going missing? If anything, I wish the expansion had done just a little bit more of seeing that side of how people have reacted, that he has been missing for so long. And I know that it's a fairly recent event, so the seeds of doubt haven't been sown particularly far and wide just yet. But a little bit more of that might have been nice, and I suppose this book goes some way into that. No real bombshells as far as I can see here on this one. It just teaches us a bit more about Palawa, and again, I think that there's some use in that, just to keep people on the same page as to what exactly is going on. So yeah, there you go, guys. That's the lore, the lost lore of Path of Fire, of each of the maps, and hopefully in Living Worlds, you know what, I would be so happy if each time they add a new map now, they do this, because they were flirting with it in Season 3, they nailed it in this expansion, and why not just keep going with it, because I think it is so nice, and putting that voice act in there is that extra little touch, truly brilliant. So let me know what you think, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you for even more good stuff. I'm going to be working on the Flameseeker prophecies themselves next, which means I have to do that meta a lot of times, but I'll be back with that as soon as I can. Cheers, everyone. Catch you next time.